with Dorrinal and Daddy Warpig. And finally, we are back. That's right, Geek Gab. We have been on hiatus for about 4 months now due to grave technical difficulties that spanned both software and hardware. Luckily enough, everything went wrong at the same time, which makes troubleshooting really easy because you just have to get rid of everything. Get rid of everything and start over brand new from scratch. And then you know everything is fixed. So I am sitting here at a new desk, literally with a new keyboard, a new trackpad, a new microphone, the same trusty Macintosh computer that I've had for 5 years, and a whole new install of Google Chrome, hoping, praying, making sacrifices to pagan gods that the show will run smoothly. Fortunately, we've already had our first problem, which is my co-host, Brian Niemeyer, who proposed doing the show at this time, this day, has not, as of yet, joined us. So it is just me and Dorrinal. And while I take a sip of water, I'll let Dorrinal off the leash so he can say hi. How's your Saturday, Dorrinal?
Hey, doing great. I'm really happy to be back. It's exciting to get back in the groove. So I guess you burned everything to the ground and, like a phoenix, let your new system rise from the ashes.
Actually, it was a lazy man's disaster because everything burned itself to the ground for me. I didn't have to do anything other than uninstall Chrome. So,
well, it's good to be back. Life is good. Had a great summer. Looking forward to Geek Gab and football season. PAX just ended. We got lots of new games on the horizon.
I am looking forward to Fallout 4. I will not lie.
There's a lot of buzz about that.
It looked awesome, and I know it's just a demo. Demos are absolutely indistinguishable from stage magic. They're an illusion. They're a lie. So, and trailers are one step less honorable and honest than a demo. But at the same time, the trailer looked really cool.
And they were showing off things like... I'm thinking of existing stuff, like the player housing stuff in... was that Fallout New Vegas, where you could build your own fort and everything?
No, that's brand new for Fallout 4. Brand new for Fallout 4. You can build a fort and even build an entire little town as it grows. It's a strategic, management, kind of like a civilization game or something similar, which I think is just awesome. And it gives it makes all that junk that other people who are not me, compulsively collect. It makes it worthwhile and useful junk. I'm very excited to try it out and see if it's fun.
Well, it sure beats putting it all in a cave.
Are selling it piece by piece to all the junk merchants in the world, and then realizing you actually need one tiny little part of it later. Yeah, I did that once.
That's great. I mean, for people who like the series and everything, if they pull that kind of feature off, it'll really make you feel like you're living in that awful post-apocalyptic wasteland. So, let's hope that it comes out as good as it looks.
Plus, they sent it in Boston, so they're about 33% towards post-apocalyptic wasteland anyway. It's not. Yes, I'm making fun of Boston. Anyone out there, if you're from Massachusetts, the odds are low that any of our listeners are from Massachusetts. But if you are, that's a slam at your capital city. So, okay. today, let me do some housekeeping. I don't know how many of you listen to the old Geek Gab, but we used to do a 1-hour show every Sunday at the exact same time. Things have changed in my personal life. My availability is no longer as constant as it was. So what we're doing is we are going to do a half-hour show sometime during the week when we can get together and talk about it. It will make it more flexible for all three of us. And then, hopefully, when we get it set up, sometime after that, we'll be uploading the new half-hour episodes to make them available as podcasts, so you can subscribe to your podcast, get it on your computer, on your iDevices, on your Android devices, or whatever other filthy machines might come to mind. Gonna do a half. Makes it more enjoyable, more convenient for you, more convenient for us. So this is when this show, when we could get together today, but it's not going to be happening every week at the same time, and it's only going to be a half-hour show, which gives us a chance to do a little bit of patter at the beginning, a little bit of patter at the end, and to cover two topics, hopefully, and keep it concise, keep it moving, and not bore people to tears. The two topics we are talking about today, in whatever order, I get to pick the topics, so Dorrinal gets to pick the order in which we attack them. The two topics we're going to be talking about today are the recent Hugo Awards and my controversial theory on the real winner of the Hugos. And we're also going to be talking about Sherlock Holmes, the BBC television series. And they also have a new episode, a Christmas episode, coming up in a month or two. They might actually just broadcast that on Christmas. I'm not British. I don't know. I don't care. My exposure to British television is typically 5 to 10 years after it's gone off the air. Somebody will finally say, oh yeah, by the way, that was a good show. That was a good show. You could check it out. So I go check it out years after everybody in Britain has seen it. That's what happened with Spaced. Spaced was the sort of sitcom series that launched the career. Man, I am so bad with names today. Been a bad day with names. Launched the career of Simon Pegg, the star of Shaun of the Dead, the star of Hot Fuzz, the star Scotty, the engineer on the new Star Trek. He did a sitcom called Spaced. People loved it. I heard about it like 5 to 10 years after it happened, after I'd already watched Shaun of the Dead and other stuff. So I said, oh, sure, I'll go back and watch that, see how it is. It was good. I liked it. So Sherlock Holmes, by the way, I know exactly who to blame for telling me to go watch Sherlock Holmes, and who's to blame for me to going and watching it while it is still on the air. And I can put every single iota of blame squarely on the shoulders of my co-host, Dorrinal. So, Dorrinal,
what have I done?
What is your justification? I want you to justify to these poor people listening to the show. I want you to justify to them why you would recommend Sherlock Holmes to an innocent and naive and trusting friend.
Wow. So why would I do that to somebody? It is done in large episodes, 3-episode seasons. It is easy to consume, binge watching a la Netflix and etc. It'll take one evening for a series if you're serious about it. It is well cast. I think the casting is the best part about it. It is pretty well written. It's a great take on the Sherlock Holmes character. And in the end, it was a lot of fun. And so I would recommend it to a friend to get them obsessed and make them spend 9 hours a pop watching these shows.
Just in case you're wondering, unlike the other recommendation Dorrinal gave me, which I still, despite my promise, written in blood on sacred parchment I brought back from the Holy Land, Despite that promise, I have not yet watched The Raid Redemption. I am planning on it. It's in my Netflix queue. I was going to watch it the other day, but didn't. I watched Sherlock Holmes instead. So this is it was kind of an apology to Dorrinal to watch Sherlock Holmes instead of watching The Raid. Not that I am nervous about The Raid. I think it'll be great. I think it'll be awesome. I'm looking forward to it. It looks like a really awesome action movie, which I love. But instead, I watched fully 9 hours. Actually, I watched more than 9 hours because they broadcast a little 15-minute or 10-minute teaser in between Series 2 and Series 3. And I watched that as well. So, yeah, I spent 9+ hours watching Sherlock Holmes. And they do break it apart. Okay, I'm going to give you some hints. Americans, if you're American listening to this show, BBC doesn't have seasons. There's not season 1, season 2. What they have are called series. So you have the exact same show is broadcast with 6 usually hour-long or half-hour-long episodes. That's called a series. So when you hear Series 1, Series 2, Series 3, that's 3 seasons. So I've watched Sherlock Holmes has broadcast 3 series, which means 3 years of Sherlock Holmes. And each series breaks down into 3 different movies, coherent plots, about an hour and a half to an hour 40 minutes long, and each of those is 2 shows. So if you go to watch it, be aware that you're watching basically movies. A mini movie, it's about an hour and a half to hour 40 minutes. That's just Sherlock Holmes on one specific case and John Watson. Now, you say that the casting was great. You like the casting. What about the casting really seems to mesh?
So, the important thing, the core of the show, of course, is Sherlock Holmes. And they found a great guy, Benedict Cumberbatch, to play that role. He's got the right amount of, delivery and humor, and you get that you get that high functioning sociopath feel out of him without him being over the top. But the other thing that's really important is Watson and the way they get along together. And Martin Freeman, I think, is the single best player on the show, and the way that they work together, and they really they really express their friendship believably. It's a really good pairing. The chemistry is the word. They've got great chemistry, and Martin Freeman's Watson is excellent, and Cumberbatch's Holmes is excellent, and it just works. You watch it together, and you feel like you're watching, Holmes and Watson in modern day England.
And a thing I think they did right is they're aware. I mean, Sherlock Holmes is one of the most popular, most well-known characters in the world, and he's been done again and again many times. And it wasn't enough for them just to move the show into the modern day. They also went back and made a bunch of different choices to clearly distinguish this show from all the other Sherlock Holmes productions, because Sherlock Holmes had gotten really cliche. There had been built up things that were in the original stories and things that different people added that kind of became almost canon, had been built up, such as the fact that Watson is this tubby, dull, kind of physically useless guy. And in this show, Watson is a soldier. He's fresh back from Afghanistan, and he has had combat training and has actually been in fights, in combat. And so he's a bit of a badass. Watson kicks ass. He can straight up walk up to a junkie who's pulling a knife on him, punch him, take the knife away, and walk off. He knows what he's doing because he's a soldier. He's not this useless dullard who just lags around following Sherlock, who's there for Sherlock to explain to him exactly why these clues mean things. Not that they don't get to that, but he also has ideas. He also comes up with correlations, and he also gives that information to Sherlock. That's all interesting. That's all a different take on the character than you've seen in the past. And Inspector Lestrade, who you may remember as the completely hapless and inept Scotland Yard investigator who was always coming to Sherlock Holmes to beg him for help in whatever case he couldn't solve. Well, in this show, and Lestrade in the books and in the previous movies really loathed Sherlock Holmes. There was a great deal of antipathy. He hated the fact that he had to come to Sherlock Holmes, and he didn't respect him at all. He was always second-guessing him, always treating him like he didn't know what he was doing, which made you wonder, why the heck are you, a policeman, hiring a consulting detective if you're not going to listen to what he says, if what he's saying isn't worthwhile? Well, in this show, he appreciates Sherlock Holmes' talents. He acts as an intermediary between Sherlock Holmes and the rest of the police department, who do hate and loathe Sherlock Holmes and are eager to jump upon any tiny scrap of evidence that suggests that Sherlock Holmes might not know exactly what he's talking about. So Lestrade, they also made some different choices to sharply distinguish him from almost the cliche that had grown up around the character. And I think that's what's most interesting about the show. They had to do this. It couldn't be enough to take someone from Victorian times and plop them down in 2015 London and expect you to understand the character. So you have to update them with modern language. You have to update them with modern attitudes. But at the same time, as long as you're doing that, you may as well update the characters to get away from the cliches that have encrusted this IP, if you'll. Man, I wish I had a better term than that. I hate that term. If IP was a person, I would punch it in the face and kick it in the nuts and beat it to the ground. That's how much I loathe IP. And I don't want, the other term is also really abominable. This character, these stories, this universe. In order to update them, they also went and changed some things that had gotten sort of moldy, sort of samey over the last 100 years, and really put a change on the characters that makes it worthwhile to watch. And they did the same thing with Sherlock Holmes by making him, as Dorrinal alluded to, a high-functioning sociopath, not just a heavily intellectual, high-functioning autistic, which is, in retrospect, quite a lot of what Sherlock Holmes was. So I enjoyed most of them. The third series is a little bit weaker, but the second episode of the third series is the best of all of them. So take that as a strong recommendation from me. And I'm assuming a strong recommendation from Dorrinal.
Absolutely. I mean, we could pick some nits if you like. There's a couple of things that I didn't like. One of them was they've got the concept of Sherlock's mind palace, which sometimes is kind of awkwardly done with special graphics on the screen and everything. The flip side to that, and I can't spoil this because it's absolutely wonderful, but after a couple of series of awkward, cheesy mind palace moments, scenes where he's deep in thought and sort of they have to try to express those thoughts on the screen, they have a mind palace sequence while Sherlock Holmes is completely drunk, and it's one of the best moments in the whole show. Never mind, just a weak third season. It's just the whole show is one of the best moments, and I loved it.
This is something I think could have worked and something I think might have been interesting. A mind palace is a location either manufactured or real. And what you do is you imagine this location in your mind. And at significant places in this location, let's say it's your house. So you walk up to the door, and the very first thing in the front of your house is your door. And so you associate that door with some piece of information. And then you open up your door, you go inside, and immediately to the right is a closet. You associate that closet with some piece of information. Now, this is a real technique. This really happened. This really existed. It goes back 600 years or so, where you use a physical location as a key to help you memorize information, because you treat the information like it was a physical object in that location. And as you walk through that location, you place memories or pieces of information, people's names down like they were objects, and each of them is keyed to a location in this place. And it works because of spatial memory. As human beings, our spatial memory is excellent. What would have been cool, to take it back to the series, is if that location that he made his memory palace out of was something that A, they showed every time he went into the mind palace, and B, was something that was of great personal value or interest to Sherlock, and helped illuminate who he was as a character and what his childhood was like. So that instead of him telling you about his past, which he doesn't do, which he wouldn't do, because that's not in his character, we could get hints of what his past and his childhood was like based on what we see in the Mind Palace and references to things that his brother Mycroft makes or he makes that take you back to the Mind Palace, where Mycroft might say, blah, 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 fell into the lake. Oh, yeah, we remember that because a couple of episodes ago, he walked past in his Mind Palace, and there was a pond out in back of this house. And that was, where this particular event where he almost drowned happened. Oh, that's kind of interesting. Now we know some more about Sherlock Holmes by comparing the locations in his Mind Palace to things that happen in the rest of the series. That, I think, would have been really cool.
Yeah, for sure. I think when you see the when you see those little things that could have been done better, or the little cracks in the facade, you realize that they just the writers and everything, they had such a great idea and they ran with it, but they haven't figured it all out. Right? It's not perfect.
Oh yeah, and I'm not saying that its lack makes any kind of undermines the show or destroys the show at all. It's just, when you talk about the Mind Palace, I agree, it is kind of dissatisfying, and that was just the one thing that leaped to mind right now, actually. I hadn't thought of that before. Right now, that leaped to mind about how you could do a Mind Palace that would be cool and wouldn't be just exposition, wouldn't just be him wandering around. It would be, let's see where he goes now. Okay. Any last thoughts on Sherlock?
Martin Freeman, go.
Martin Freeman, okay. By the way, just so you know, Martin Freeman plays Bilbo in the recent Hobbit movies, the overly long 3-episode Hobbit movies.
Don't watch those.
Benedict Cumberbatch is the voice of Smaug the dragon. So there's a little bit of Sherlock tie-in to the Hobbit movies. We should talk about the Hobbit movies one episode. Not this week, but one episode. All right. We have about 10 minutes left of the show. So the second topic I wanted to talk about today was the recent Hugos. And I was planning on talking about this with Brian here, because Brian was part of this whole Hugo's brouhaha. So he's not here. I'm just going to have to carry this all myself, and Dorrinal pitching in whenever he has a comment. My thinking about the Hugos is this. And some of you listening may not know what the Hugos are, so let me start with there. There's a series of different science fiction conventions held all over the country. Starting in 1953, I believe, they nominated one of these as WorldCon, the World Science Fiction Convention. So all of these different conventions, one of them is Sasquan that goes on in Spokane, one of them is Mid-Americon that goes on in Kansas City, and there are other cons in New York and Philadelphia and whatever. Every year, one of those is nominated. One of these already existing conventions is also dubbed WorldCon. And at WorldCon, the primary thing that happens with it is the World Science Fiction Society awards its annual Hugo Awards. Now, the Hugo Awards are shaped like a rocket. They're named after the first great editor of science fiction from the before the Golden Age, during the age of pulps. His name is Hugo Gernsback, and that's where a lot of great science fiction writers got their start, is working for Hugo Gernsback. So they named the awards after him. They're called the Hugos. The Hugos are voted on by everyone who attends WorldCon and everyone who buys a supporting membership for WorldCon. Starting about 15 years ago, the awards began being politicized. And I don't want to get into that because it's a long story and it's not pertinent to the rest of what I want to talk about in the last few minutes. They began being politicized, and as they were politicized, a lot of people got upset. Larry Correia, the author of the Monster Hunter International books, who has been a guest on this show, started something called Sad Puppies. The purpose of Sad Puppies was this. Larry was sitting at a table at WorldCon. He was a new writer. He was excited because he had been nominated for a Hugo, and someone said to him, "You'll never win a Hugo because your politics are wrong. They won't vote for you. You won't win a Hugo." And what he found out is that there was a small clique of people who were doing what they called log rolling, where one year I'll vote for you, and the next year you vote for me for various different Hugos. And the clique has been deduced from analyzing voting patterns at about 40 people. So about 40 people could control who got the majority of Hugos, the majority of the time, for about 15 years. Well, this whole thing offended Larry, because after the show, people told him specifically, well, you know, the Hugos are for everybody. They're for all of science fiction, for all fans who read science fiction. That's who the Hugos are for. And he was told, well, the Hugos are for quality, and only quality, and only quality matters. You're just not good enough to get a Hugo. He's an accountant. He went back, he looked at the voting patterns, made some deductions, and the next year he did what he called sad puppies. He tossed off one blog post where he said, hey, the Hugos are controlled by this political clique who won't vote for anybody who doesn't share their politics. It'd be cool if we could get some other people nominated. Let's see what happens. And put out a list of people to nominate. And that first year, they got one nominee on. It came back the next year with Sad Puppies to Rainbow Lighthouse, the Huggany. Sad Puppies is named because boring, preachy message fic makes puppies cry. And so in an effort to prevent the scourge of puppy-related sadness, he started Sad Puppies to Rainbow Lighthouse, the Huggany. Sad Puppies 2 got several people on the ballot, and one of them actually won a Hugo. Sad Puppies 3 was this year. Sad Puppies 3, when the nominations were counted, owned the Hugos for 7 categories. All of them. All Sad Puppies people that the Hugo clique would normally not vote for. A couple of them, one of them was disqualified, and 2 of the Sad Puppies nominees pulled out after they were subject to rabid, vicious, nasty, personal attacks, calling them Nazis and all the usual homophobes, racists, sexist, all the usual garbage that gets thrown at people, despite the fact that the Sad Puppies list of recommendations for nominations had more people who were racial minorities, ethnic minorities, more women, and more sexual minorities than the competitors, than the Hugo cliques voting, than those that they nominated. And indeed, far more than actually got Hugos this year. What happened at the Hugo Awards was this. Now, this is a huge controversy among a part of the science fiction, and we're talking literature now, novels, short stories, magazines, fan art, fan magazines, public art, things like that, professional art, things like that. So, after dominating the nominations, what happened at the Hugo Awards was one long show for 3 hours. Seriously, it was as long as the Oscars to give out about 1/5 as many awards to science fiction novels. It was basically one long, we hate the Sad Puppies, and anyone who supported the Sad Puppies can get the hell out of science fiction and fantasy. We don't want you to write books. We don't want you to buy books. We don't want you to vote on our award. Every single sketch, every single presentation, everything said in the entire pre-award show and the post-award show was 100% a slap in the face of the Sad Puppies. And they awarded the 5 categories where Sad Puppies dominated the slate. 2,500 people who supported the politics of this formerly 40-person clique voted no award. What they were saying is, to a man who they themselves have nominated for a Hugo 39 times, who won a Hugo 5 times, his name is Mike Resnick, won a Hugo 5 times, was nominated 35 times. All of a sudden, because he was nominated by Sad Puppies, they decided that nothing he did was worth a Hugo, and instead, when you have 5 nominations, you can also vote for a 6th, which is no award. And if people vote for no award more than any other nominee, no award wins and no Hugo is given out that year. This has only happened 5 times in the entire history of the Hugos from 1953 to 2014. Only 5 no awards in all categories ever awarded. But this year, 2015, 5 no awards across the board. Every category where Sad Puppies dominated the nominations got no awarded, and every category where there was at least one other person won. So, who is it that really won the Hugos? Larry Correia won the Hugos. Because when he was told the Hugo Awards are for everyone in science fiction and fantasy, George R.R. Martin, who hated the Sad Puppies, came out in a post on Facebook and said, no, the Hugo Awards ought to be voted on only by people at Worldcon, not all of fandom, because people at Worldcon are better fans, read more, care more about science fiction and fantasy than all of these Sad Puppies participants. So every single thing that they told Larry Correia, that they later denied telling Larry Correia, they proved this year. They proved the awards were political and have been political for 15 years. They proved there was a clique, and this clique has dominated awards for 15 years. They proved that they were only for a small, tiny portion of fandom and not for all of fandom. They proudly, loudly, boastfully proclaimed this, verbally, explicitly. It wasn't just demonstrating that Larry Correia was right. They announced that he was right and patted themselves on the back for doing so. So the real winner of the Hugo Awards this year is Larry Correia, because for 3 years he's been saying the same thing. For 3 years, this clique has been denying it, and this year he was 100% vindicated. So that's my little editorial on the Hugo Awards. We are about a minute over time, so it's obviously time for us to go. I'm going to let Dorrinal get in a last word to say whatever he wants to say.
Hey, everybody. It's a good summary. I'd love to spend some more time talking about the finer points of there. I would say that I'm not sure anybody won this year's Hugos, but you can easily point out who lost. The authors, the editors, the writers, and most of all, the average fan who doesn't maybe they don't go to Worldcon, maybe they don't pay for those memberships to nominate and vote, but just to watch sort of the genre and writers that they may know and love and would like to read, or they're missing out on that for effectively political infighting. It's a shame.
They said that Jim Butcher isn't good enough to win a Hugo. I just find that offensive.
Let me put it this way. I mean, people who've been listening to the Gab know that I'm not a big reader, but there are 2 authors that I read. I read all their new stuff. I read everything that Jim Butcher publishes on the Dresden Files, and I read Patrick Rothfuss. I think he's the best fantasy writer of our generation. Full stop. They're actually both on opposite sides of this issue. So in Patrick Rothfuss is published by Tor Books, I believe, and he had a novella out this year, which I thought was great. In fact, I think we talked about it earlier on the Gab. Didn't get nominated because I may be mistaken, but I think the puppies dominated the novella slate. And Jim Butcher, who's not actually a puppy, but a puppy recommended author who writes the kind of stuff that Larry Correia and other puppies might like. We love the Dresden Files here in my house. We love the Dresden Files here on the Gab, and his new novel, Skin Game, the best novel to come out of him since Changes, couldn't win the award, right? I don't know what it is up against. I understand that the winner of the award was actually a very good book. Haven't read it. It's just like those 2 guys on those 2 authors alone just say everything you need to know about the state of the award.
All right. 2 topics for this week were Sherlock Holmes, the BBC show, and the Hugo Awards. The topics for next week we're going to talk about are, in point of fact, Skin Game, and Peace Talks, which is the next Dresden Files book, which we've heard nothing about other than the title. And also, we wanted to talk about Fury Road, the Mad Max movie. So that's going to be next week's show. Again, there's no set time to turn into the Gab anymore. We'll just be doing half an hour whenever we can. But we will be starting to broadcast it as a podcast. So you can subscribe to the podcast or click follow down below here and get all the news on when Geek Gab is going. They don't call it a follow though, not on YouTube. What do they call it? Subscription? Subscribe. Click subscribe below, and you can subscribe to the Gab, or you can follow us on Twitter. It's at Geek Gab. The links to those, to us, your authors, and to Geek Gab itself, will be in the description and liner notes below. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. This is Geek Gab with Dorrinal and Daddy Warpig once a week, half an hour of awesome geekly talk about anything under the sun. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you enjoyed this show. And if you want to catch us as a podcast when that goes live, I will let all of you know. This is Geek Gab for tonight. We will be back.